Hey, welcome back to the Only You. Vince here in studio, and Dr. Patino in his office. Little pre-show discussions, chatting about what's going on, some good things. But in the news, we've all been listening to the Ukraine issue occurring, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Well, most people don't even know where Ukraine is on the map. They don't know the history of that country. They don't know the ethnicities and the like. However, there's a very visceral response here in the United States. And the reason I find it curious is in the past we've had military invasions of other countries, and they were the bad guys. So we really didn't care very much. We didn't have a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy, even though there's lots of uh, innocent people in the mix. In this case, we have tons of empathy, even rage, and all sorts of emotions. So, Doctor, I want to have your listen to your side of this, and why are people responding this way?
Well, um, you see, in a situation with Ukraine, and you mentioned, I think you mentioned that we need to understand the history. We understand where this is coming from. A number of things have been done differently in this process, and the the definition of victimization has been a lot easier, right? Why is that? Because um, it wasn't like Ukraine was like, I don't know, Iraq, right? In terms of there was this evil person running a country who had invaded other countries next door and so on. Here we have a situation where we have a nuclear power, right? Which is Russia, basically negating the existence of a neighbor, right? I mean, basically what it was said at the end was, you don't exist, you're mine, right? And Ukrainians, if you look at the history, they're very prideful people. They really identify themselves as separate from Russia, even though they have very close ties, right? It's like, I don't know, it's like if the United States, with all its might, right, decides to take over my home state of Baja California, right? And say, well, that's kind of south of California, so we should have taken it in the 1850s. So I
Yeah,
think
it's
this
got
is a good
California in the name, and we have
yeah,
California, so why not? We'll just join it
yeah.
together.
Just go ahead and take it, right? And then you create a little movement in Baja saying we want to separate from Mexico, right? And then you say, now I have my flag, I can go in and help those who want to separate. Well, that's basically what is happening there, right? We in Baja have a long history with California. I mean, not only in terms of culture and history, but trade and those kinds of things. But something happened differently this time. And is that, and you're probably going to appreciate this, the intel was managed quite differently, right?
Oh yes.
So, how the information was flowing to the intel community in the past is kept very secret, right? And people would play politics and they will do their ambassador stuff, and embassies and communicating with each other. But the public in general really don't know what's behind the intel. What the administration did this time, which is very, very new, is going into just letting it out. By the way, this guy wants to do this. By the way, this guy is going to do it this way. By the way, it's going to happen fairly soon, right? To the point that actually the president of Ukraine told the United States, slow down, right? You're scaring my people. And what the United States basically said is, listen, this is happening, right?
Hmm.
You can put your head in the sand and think that it's not happening. We're telling you it's happening because the intel community knows everything. I mean, they know everything about you and me if they want to, right? And they know
If they
everything
decided
about
to, and,
exactly.
and
So
of course the intel, community sees buildups of military. I mean, this is big stuff. That was big metadata they were talking about, not so much the individual things. They could see, military equipment being moved, so it becomes pretty obvious. It's kind of hard to, hide a couple thousand tanks and troops, and it becomes easy to look at.
so what that change is our perception of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, right?
Mhm.
From the outset. And I think that that was the outcome of what happened when Crimea was invaded. I think it was 2014,
Mm.
right? That Putin decided it was time to take over that part, right? And it wasn't handled very well by the United States. I'm gonna have to say that. So this time they decided to do something different. The problem is that the anticipation, right, raised the hope that by providing the intel, we can slow them down because we're basically putting out their game, right? Well, sounds like the guy is pretty disturbed, and he decided, I don't care, and he gives, I think it was Monday last week when he gives his speech about Ukraine and how it's not a country, and decides to invade from a number of different fronts, and then says, "But it's not an invention. It's not. We're not invading Ukraine. We are in a mission."
It's a
Right?
repatriation of Russian speakers, I believe, was is the way it was put.
Exactly. So the problem is that people in general are kind of primed right now for negativity on the news because of COVID, right? So the transition from COVID to Ukraine is not a very nice transition, right? Because it raises a lot of uncertainty, right? So now you have people not only understanding that what they were told before was true, but it's actually happening, right? And then we're seeing the displacement of people. We're seeing the kids, right? So this is a war that is being fought in the media, okay? And it's difficult for the world to not take sides, right? Because you're seeing it in front of you. You're seeing 500,000 people moving out of Ukraine into Poland, right? People waiting for trains. You can see the mothers taking their kids out of the country, and interestingly enough, going back to fight.
Mm.
That's what I really find fascinating. And I don't think that anybody had the expectation that the Ukrainians were going to fight this hard, right? And that creates a serious problem for Russia, right? Because Russia has a conscripted military. Basically, people get forced to go into the military. And it's like you tell your family, you need to go and kill your cousins.
Yeah.
There's so much interaction and relation between the two that that creates a moral dilemma. A moral dilemma that makes you forces you to decide who are you with, right? I mean, before this started, there was a lot of criticism in some areas of the media about what Biden was doing. Why do we care about Ukraine? We have enough problems here in this country, right? But we still have the question, why do we care about Ukraine?
Yeah, it's a big issue. It really
Well,
is.
and the reality is that we should care about Ukraine because we care about democracy. So that is actually the message that is becoming prominent, right? Especially at the moment that we just dealt with a highly anti-democratic process in the United States, an
Hmm.
attempt to end a democratic process, right? So that creates a lot of problems for some people in this country in terms of, am I for democracy, right? Or am I for autocracy? And for a while we had somewhat of an autocratic tendency, right? That grew pretty big. And that's the dilemma, right? And that dilemma creates a lot of uncertainty and it creates a lot of anxiety. I mean, not to speak about the degree of disinformation that it gets provided, right? So I think that the transparency that was provided during the intel process and the pre-invasion process for some people is hopeful,
Mm.
right? The problem, Vince, is that we just can't not turn it off. And for as long as we keep it going, right, and we're seeing the images of 16 kids being killed today, rockets hitting the Capitol, things like that, and you are on the side of democracy, you start boiling, you start getting angry, right? You start asking why, right? I mean, and there are people who says we should send troops over there. Well, no, we don't want to do that, right? But we have to stand by the side of democracy
Hmm.
because it's good for us. I mean, what the fight that is being fought by Ukrainians against the Russians, right? Especially for those in the minority sector of this country, is enlightening, is enticing, right? I mean, to understand how spoiled we are with the idea of ownership and democracy, right? In that those people are willing to die for self determination, right?
Yeah, it's a sharp contrast to what we've been experiencing these last couple of years with the separation, with the leaning toward authoritarianism, with tough guys all over saying I'm being oppressed because I must wear a mask. All these things we're seeing the reality of it, or even what's going on in Canada with the truckers. How there's that's what we're seeing now in real time, like you said, through the social media, is real time oppression, is a real time assault on a democratically elected president, government, the people who supported that. And that's a huge thing. 200
Well,
plus years ago, we stood up to some authoritarianism, and or at least particular a monarchy, or actually a patriarch at the time, and took our freedom. I think it's important to give some perspective on that.
well, not only perspective, but it's humbling, right? It's humbling for us to sit here at a distance, right, and experience other people fighting for what they own, right? Not in a tantruming way, but in a passionate, honest way to say, don't negate my existence, right? I mean, I was listening to a girl this morning talking about how can I tolerate somebody basically telling me that I don't exist? And that resonates with a lot of people in my culture and a lot of people who are African American, right? A lot of people of Asian descent, where we basically told on a regular basis, you don't matter, you don't exist, right? So, on one hand, I think it's very enlightening. On the other hand, it's very anxiety provoking, right?
I have a friend who spent 30 years in the military, Army Special Forces officer, older than me, and he sent me a text saying, "Wow, this is the war. This is the war that's occurring now. Is what I signed up for back in the day. A true," and he said this, a true, good versus evil, no ambiguity, no, hey, yeah, the government's bad, but the people are good. A good, he literally used these words, a good old fashioned good guys against bad guys war, and it's affecting. I mean, he is actually considering taking a flight over there to help out.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, I was listening to the news this morning, and apparently there have been some people actually starting to get recruited to go and fight for the Ukrainians individually, not as part of the government. You know, because unfortunately, what I see happening is that the Russian government decided to play all their cards on this one, right? I mean, they're showing all the ugliness and the problem. This happened with Chechnya before,
Oh yes.
right? And it was pretty. I mean, it was pretty brutal, right? So the concern right now is that if put against the wall, he's going to do the same thing that he did in Chechnya. And the problem is that Kiev is a capital of almost 5 million people, right? So we're talking about massive casualties there with the people. Um, but again, we need to. And I found myself this morning. I was actually, like I do every morning, started distributing work for people in the hospital, things like that. While I'm doing that, I'm always listening to the news, right? And I'm listening to the news, and I caught myself getting upset.
Mm.
I got myself getting irritated, and I said, "Why am I getting irritated?" Right? Uh, and I was getting irritated because part of the news had to do with kids going hungry. I mean that. I mean, I had to tell you that really got to me. I mean, it got to me um, because that's not fair, right? And unfortunately, in any war, whether it's in Ukraine or is in Syria or is anywhere, okay, there's serious victimization of the populace, right?
Mm.
That don't nobody takes into account, collateral damage. These are people, right? And it gets to me, kids going hungry. That in particular, I mean, I recognize the valor and I recognize the drive of the people to fight, and I'm fine with that. But kids going hungry, and then the consequences mental health wise, not only of them being having to be displaced from their environment and their home and their schooling, but going hungry, right? And then being left behind because the parents are going or staying in Ukraine. Because if you're over 18 years old in Ukraine, you cannot leave the country.
Yeah,
Everybody has to stay if you're a man, which I really find fascinating. Um, so I find it interesting that it's only men who are staying. Women have the option of staying, right? And I think it's a good thing that at least one parent is going to stay with the child, but the child still has to deal with the idea that I'll never see my dad again.
that's tough. That's very
Well, I
rough.
mean, the emotional, psychological, and social consequences of what is happening right now are felt for generations.
Yes. Yeah,
I mean, you can,
I mean,
you,
you were have been around long enough, like it was until, geez, the late '80s, early '90s, before the, at the time, Soviet Union leadership had people in leadership who didn't live through World War II, who weren't affected by that. It took at
yes,
least a generation, a couple generations, right, from the '40s to the '80s, for them to get over that, to be able to move
yes.
on from it. So you're right. Things like this have a ripple effect for quite a while.
Yeah, not only that, but I mean, you go to the Balkans, for example, and the war they lived there, and people even today will talk to you about the trauma that they sustained, and there were war crimes committed during that war.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it is sad and inhumane what is happening in Ukraine. And as your friend said, very well defined in terms of the good guys and the bad guys. So when it's presented like that, it is difficult for the rest of the world to not worry and to not be in favor of the good guys, right? Um, because not only they're good guys, they're underdogs.
Mm.
I mean, the odds are terribly against them, right? But they're fighting like hell, and they're going to continue doing it, right? So this is not going to be a walk in the park for the Russians. And I think that we need to figure out ways to deal with our own frustration and anger, right? I mean, I after I was started getting upset and realizing why I was upset, I got on the internet and sent some money to the relief funds for Ukraine in terms of uh, there's a site for feeding people, right?
Mm.
It's a world feeding thing, and I said, well, I can put 5 cents worth of my help, to to feel that I'm doing something positive. I mean, I know my contribution is not going to be the end of the world, but it would help feed some people, and that makes me feel that I'm giving something of me to them. And I think that that's one way of managing your stress, right? That's one way of I mean, you can get together as a state and say, well, we're going to create a fund and want to collect some money and we're going to send it to Ukraine for the displaced people or whatever it is. There are active things that we can engage ourselves with that may be of some help to people. The other thing is that we need to recognize when things are getting too stressful and affecting our functioning. And I always advise that you recognize that and start changing how you listen to the news, right? Just like we have a schedule for work, just like we have a schedule for eating, we have a schedule for fun. We have a schedule for almost everything. Can we schedule the news
Mm.
and say, I'm going to watch the news only for 1 hour at this time, and that's it, and educate ourselves to do that? That requires that you don't look at the news on your phone, right? I mean, I sometimes I dream of the possibility of having a day without a phone, right? I mean, that we start a
Would be
campaign and
nice.
said, I don't know, December, whatever is going to be one day without a phone in the world. Let's turn them off.
Well, maybe
All of them.
we'll do that with our viewers at some point.
Yeah, I mean that is something that we need to practice because the phone gains control over us versus us having control of the phone. And we need to learn to turn it off and to understand that nothing happens. I mean, really, truly, for all of you who are listening, nothing happens when you turn off your phone. When you get back to the phone, everything that you were supposed to see every second is still going to be there, right? You're not missing anything. And sometimes we can get overwhelmed by an overload of information, especially if the information is contradictory, because it forces you to have an opinion, right? So sometimes it's better for you to stay focused on the things that you control. You control if you turn off the phone. You control if you volunteer to do something. You control if you want to talk about it or not, right? And sometimes it becomes an issue at work, right? Because people have different opinions at work. And it's very easy to use work or people close to you as the people that you dump stuff on, right? I do have to say that it's not healthy to dump your emotions at work, right? There's nothing in it for you besides the recognition that somebody may recognize that you are right, whatever that means, right? And you have to be careful of not bottling things so much that you get home and then you dump on your kids or you dump on your significant other, right? Because that's the only place that you feel safe to do so. So again, you have to be cognizant of what you're feeling, right? I mean, and I'm kind of trained to do that, right? So when I found myself irritated this morning, I had to process, okay, calm down. I mean, it was 6 in the morning, right? So there was nobody to dump on. So I said, okay, I'm getting upset. I'm getting frustrated. What's going on? What am I doing right now? Well, I am listening to the news. There was something about the news that triggered you to be frustrated. So once I recognize I have choices, right? I can turn off the news, right? Or I can put some music and listen to music instead. Or I can decide to donate to feed some kids in Ukraine. Whatever it is, whatever your capability and your ability is, just do it, right? You're not going to miss anything. I can tell you that the way news are today, the news that you listen at 6 in the morning, you're going to listen to again at 3 in the afternoon and again at 5, and all day long if you want to connect with a cable channel news, right? Is it all the time? Okay, so how
Yep.
many times do you have to hear the same thing?
You said something interesting about your actions. I remember hearing stories of people living through World War II, and the entire nation uh, did stuff. People rationed food. People donated extra metal for building things. There was a collective movement, and I think you hit on something very interesting. That for people who in particular are feeling this emotionally, I know my wife is. Pick an action. Pick an action that would have an impact. Um, don't worry if it's not huge. Obviously, you can't go ahead and fly over there. But whatever it is, even if it's simply posting a positive message about it, do something that helps alleviate some of your own stress.
Yeah, because that's contagious, right? I mean, you taking an action and letting people know that you're taking action, other people feels comfortable too. I think that there have been some actions happen in some states where they have collected thousands of dollars to help the Ukrainians, right? And we have to be supportive. We have to be part of. In this country, Vince, we have fallen into the trap of being afraid of being a community,
Hmm.
right? everybody is a community in their own right,
Little
and
tribes, but not one large nation anymore.
exactly, and these are the type of opportunities, you know, to hold hands together, right? Because it doesn't matter what stripes you wear. These are really, okay, the opportunities to have a common voice. Okay. And I'm not, I mean, I'm not dreaming, right? I mean, during before the second big war, there were a lot of people supporting Germany in the
Hmm.
United States, right? It's not that we expect 100% getting together. Okay, there's always going to be dissent, and there always going to be a different opinion. But we have to understand that in this particular case, as your friend said, there are good guys and there are bad guys, and it's not they're not poorly defined. Okay, so we have to understand that we need to stop using moral equivalences to say the bad guys aren't that bad because we were bad guys before, right? Because that's usually what happens, and that's another trap that happens with the news is that they start to guide you into moral equivalency, right? Well, you guys went after Saddam Hussein and you kill him, right? Yeah, there were reasons for that. Were there some missteps? Absolutely, right? But that is very different than what is happening to Ukraine,
Very
right?
different.
I mean, the people from Iraq didn't want to be controlled by Saddam Hussein, right? I mean, the Ukrainians elected their president. They didn't want him replaced by force,
Hmm.
and they don't want him killed, right? So it becomes important to understand that moral equivalency is a distraction, right? I mean, there are a lot of bad things that have happened in the world. There are a lot of good things that have happened in the world, but each one of them in their own right.
And
This
this
one
is
is not a good thing happening.
Yeah, this is a hard one to argue against, and I think it was Reagan said that one day it'd be interesting if there was an extraterrestrial threat, and of course all the UFO people went crazy, but an extraterrestrial threat that unified the globe. In this case, hopefully, hopefully our response to Ukraine can help unify our country a little bit. A tragedy somewhere else can help us because the last couple of years have been pretty divisive. I think it is a good opportunity for us to understand that authoritarianism is is evil. And there's a huge trend toward it globally. China, Russia, Turkey, a bunch of different places, and almost us in the last couple of years. Understanding that democracy has a price, and the price is being paid by some pretty brave people right now in Ukraine.
Yeah, evil has to be identified. Evil has to be fought. I mean, we have to destroy evil. We have to find a way to recognize it, right? And we have to understand that it doesn't matter who the evil comes from. It can be evil external, it can be evil internal. But we have to have a very well defined moral compass to do that, right? And we need to stop being directed by misinformation and disinformation, which is almost it's almost a joke when you listen to how the Russians were disinforming the world while the intel was being presented, right? It was like, okay, here's what we know, and these are the facts, and you're just coming back with misinformation while you're being given the facts. And unfortunately, we have lived that in this country.
Yep.
We've been there before. We present the facts, and then we get counterfacts that are basically disinformation, that it has no basis in reality, that it's almost delusional.
And if you remember our show back in the day about disinformation and misinformation, they're distinctly different things. And different information is actually a strategy in order to manipulate.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that we need to be able to recognize it. And when somebody's telling you, why should we care about Ukraine? You can simply answer because it's good for us.
Mm.
That's it. Right. I mean, we don't have to have a logical, long lasting discussion about the science behind caring, right? But we have to care enough about us that we care enough about them.
Back to our word of the year, compassion. Again, guys, control the information. Turn your phone off if you need to. Turn your news off. Uh, some introspection to understand if you're being upset, what that is. And if it helps you alleviate some of that uncertainty and anxiety, some actions. Do something to help it out. Once again, Doctor, truly appreciate your time and your wisdom. Thank you again, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you, Vince. We'll see you next week. Good to be with you today.